Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our final webinar in this two-day webinar blitz. The webinar will begin shortly. My name is Karen Brinson-Bell. I am a member of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center consulting team, and I will be your moderator for today's session. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center and FairVote partnered with the Center for Civic Design to conduct a usability study about ranked choice voting. This webinar and the webinar that we had yesterday review the findings from phase 1 of the study. The presenter for this webinar is Taapsee Ramchandani of the Center for Civic Design. She is a civic anthropologist currently studying the politics of civic engagement for her doctoral dissertation. Before we bring Taapsee on, let's go over a few housekeeping matters. Participants have been muted for this webinar to reduce audio interference since we have a large number of attendees. If you have technical issues, please use the question option to send a message to the organizers so we may try to assist. Handouts are available in the Handouts tab of the control panel. To expand or minimize the control panel, click the orange arrow of your webinar taskbar. If you have a question or comment regarding the webinar, please type that message in the question box. Alternatively, you may email your questions or comments to info@rankedchoicevoting.org. To keep this webinar to about 45 minutes and out of respect for your time, there will only be a brief question and answer session at the end. Questions we are unable to address during this live session will be answered in a follow-up document, which we will email to attendees and also post with a recording of this session on the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website. Those will be done in about a week. Now I will turn it over to Taapsee to share findings on voter education and presenting ranked choice voting results.
Thanks, Karen. And once again, on behalf of the Center for Civic Design, I'm delighted to be here. Today, I'd like to share some insights on research that we conducted on RCV voter guides, as well as the display or the presentation of RCV election results. So let me start by delving first into voter education and voter guides. If voters don't have an accurate understanding of how ranked choice voting works, then they're less likely to understand why it was adopted and the benefits that ranked choice voting offers. They're also less likely to understand how to mark their ballot in the way that they intend. So when we started this research and we were trying to understand how voters made sense of ranking, we tested different versions of a voter guide to learn about three major things. One of them is what information matters most to voters. We wanted to discover pain points in the language and the design layout of voter education materials. And we wanted to find ways to effectively convey the right message in the way that all voters could understand. So we tested various iterations of a voter guide that used best design practices. What you see on your screen are different examples of voter education materials that we found across states in the country. We had flyers and brochures from Minneapolis, from Oakland, San Francisco, North Carolina, Burlington, Virginia, and then we also had FairVote's own materials that we used to develop our own testing samples. We looked at all of these materials, and with every round of testing, we updated that till we finally got to our final testing material. So on the top right-hand side was the first simple voter education sheet that we shared with our participants. And when we tested that, we found out that participants did not get information on the concept of ranked choice voting from that simple flyer, and they asked us about it. What is ranked choice voting? Don't just tell me how my vote gets counted or what happens to my first and second choice, but I just want to know about the concept of RCV. The illustration also caused anxiety and confusion among some participants, and this was primarily because of the giant X symbol over candidates that indicated to some participants that their first candidate doesn't count. The first choice gets cast aside and then goes to your second choice and your third choice, and that was a big problem. There was also a lack of synergy between the language that was used in this voter education flyer and information that they were getting out of their ballot instructions. And so there was inconsistent language that was used that was throwing off voters. So at the bottom, we have these two images. That was our second round of testing, where we updated our voter education materials to now talk about what ranked choice voting offers, the benefits that it has, and then we used illustrations to clearly show how ranked choice voting ballots get counted. Our final iteration developed that even further and took the form of a booklet. So on the front, on the extreme left side was the front of the booklet, which clearly enunciated the what and the why of ranked choice voting. When you open the booklet in the landscape mode, which is on the extreme right, it explained to you how the winner is determined and how votes get counted. And once you close the booklet on the back side, the information took the form of an FAQ with 4 different questions that were answered in the words of participants. So how we conducted this study is we used a combination of observations and interviews to learn about our participants' experiences. We tested these voter guides in combination with paper and digital ballots. We really wanted to understand how voter education fit into the ecosystem of voting, and ideally a voter would get the voter ed materials beforehand and then use that, if they read it, to mark their ballot. So the testing took place over 4 months, August to November 2016. Location was 3 different states, Minneapolis, New Jersey, and California. We had over 50 participants. Everyone was over 18, and they represented a range of voter behaviors, from engaged voters to first-time voters. And as they observed, as they filled out their ballots, as they read the materials, we observed their behavior, and at the end we also conducted one-on-one interviews with each participant that lasted about 1 hour. So a key discovery when it comes to voter education materials is that a voter guide should answer the what, why, and how of ranked choice voting to be effective. And this is because it is a complicated new system of voting for a lot of participants, and so having all of this information there actually built their confidence in what was expected of them and how they needed to mark their ballot. So let me now jump to the recommendations. What can you do as you're designing your voter education materials so that it is more effective in conveying the information you want to give your voters? The first overarching principle is you want to give your voters all the information that they need to prepare to vote. You can offer this information in the form of a booklet that we did. You could also have a single-page handout in your polling place on the day of voting. It could take the form of a brochure or a flyer that you put up at your polling place or at your election office, but you must give voters the what, why, and how of ranked choice voting so they feel confident in that process. You want to explain both the benefits and the basics of ranked choice voting. So just delving a little deeper into the front of our brochure, we had a very simple definition of how ranked choice voting works. We also had an illustration that was a very good reminder that ranked choice voting contests will probably have a different layout, and so we prepared for that. And we focused on the most important benefits of ranked choice voting. And in our testing, we found that these 3 benefits, the fact that it saves money, the fact that you can have stronger voices in your community as a result of it, and the fact that it broadens participation were the ones that resonated the most with our participants. You also want to answer voters' questions about how to make their choices and how their ballot is counted. Now, I mentioned this even in yesterday's webinar when we were talking about ballot design, that our participants had a lot of anxiety about, do I need to rank all candidates? And what happens to my first choice if I rank a second and third? Does it affect my first choice in any way? And so we decided to incorporate that in an FAQ format where, as you'll notice, the headers are actually the questions that voters are asking. And this resonated really well with our participants because they felt like they were being heard, they felt that this was in their voice, and so they felt very included in the process. We kept the text really short, as you can see. You never want to overload the reader at any point of time. And then at the bottom of that brochure, we also had a link for additional information in case people were curious about the details of ranked choice voting. You also want to show the connection between an individual ballot and the overall counting process. We all know that RCV is a very tough concept to wrap one's head around. And during our testing, we even asked our participants before we showed them the voter guide. They said they thought they understood what ranked choice voting is and how votes get redistributed. And so I asked them, I said, what happens, how do you think your second choice gets counted? And how does that process fit into the overall counting system? And so we got everything from, oh, it's a point system. Everyone gets weighted differently and then it all gets added up. We also got an explanation where someone said, oh, it's a backup. My second choice is a backup. If the winner can't take off, can't keep up his duties for any reason, then this is basically the vice mayor who will then take on the duty. People thought it was similar to a top two primary. And then you also had others who actually got it right and said, okay, this is a redistribution of votes. So the point is there are many different ways in which people think ranked choice voting works. And so to make a very direct, explicit connection between this is how an individual ballot might be marked and this is how it fits into the overall counting process actually clarified the counting process for a lot of people. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when I get into the election results part of it as well. You also want to present information in clear, simple language, just so voters of different literacy backgrounds can understand the information that you're trying to provide. You want to keep the information short and to the point. You want to use everyday words as much as possible. Use gets and not receives, for example. Use give and not provides is another example. And put each point in its own paragraph. It really helps people follow through the different instructions or points that you might have for them to pay attention to. Illustrations and visuals worked really well. They appeal to a wider demographic. They also reinforce any text that you might have, and so we highly recommend that you use visuals when that's possible. And you want to use icons sparingly to draw attention to different types of information. Again, always, especially with voter education material, you want to make sure that you're not overburdening voters with a lot of text-heavy information. And so icons work really well for that. If you're interested in using some generic civic icons to convey information, you could visit a website called electiontools.org. They have a really wonderful database of freely available election icons that you can use that, again, reinforce whatever text you might have on a single page. So at this point, I just want to quickly, give a shout out to the city of Minneapolis. I was there early on this year to test the election results, actually, and I discovered that their voter guide, which takes the shape of like a two-sided postcard, really. It's very handy. That was being mailed out to all voters in the city, used some of our best practices, and so that was very pleasantly surprising, and I requested them if I could showcase their postcard, and here it is, and they of course said yes, and that made us very happy. On the front of the postcard, which is the top image, there's information, crucial information on what's on your ballot, and this actually fits in really well with other research that CCD had done, our organization had done, on what do voters really care about, what really drives them to polls, and it's really information on what's on the ballot. That's the first question people ask when they're deciding whether to even participate in voting, and so that information was very succinctly provided on this postcard. And then you have key dates on the right side. And then when you flip the postcard over, these illustrations should look familiar to you. It's stuff that we worked on. It's stuff that worked well with our participants. It has information on the top on how to vote, so just 3 clear bullet points on how many you can rank, the fact that ranking is a choice. You can choose just one candidate. You don't have to choose your second and third, and the fact that your second and third choices don't count against your first choice. So basically the most important information was on the top, and then a very brief illustration, 2 illustrations that explain how your ballot would get counted when it's all tallied together. And so once again, I just wanted to thank the Director of Elections and Voter Services in the city of Minneapolis for letting us showcase materials from her office. So now I'm going to quickly switch gears and talk a little bit about election results presentation for ranked choice voting. So when we decided to do this study, we were really curious about two important pieces of information. One is, can information in election results reinforce a voter's understanding of the counting process, right? Because this is in the entire ecosystem of voting. You have a voter guide, you have ballot instructions, you have the election results display. Do they all feed into each other and enhance a voter's understanding of the process? And then the second question was, how can good design of the results interface build voter confidence in ranked choice voting? Do they become fans of the process as they encounter the results display along with the voter guide and the ballot itself? So how we conducted the study, as before, observations and interviews. We tested the results interfaces for two different types of races. One was a single winner mayoral race, that's the one in the top, and we also tested the display of a multi-winner city council race. For this particular test, we used the information provided to us by the city of Minneapolis on past races and used that. So the single winner race actually had 35 candidates, and the multi-winner race had 6 candidates running for 3 seats. So we created an interactive app. It actually read a spreadsheet to dynamically populate the results data into a web pages format. Before we tested the election results, again, we wanted to simulate a voter's actual experience as much as we could. And so we started with a voter guide, the voter guide that I just shared with you in the showcase section. I decided why not use that. I was testing these materials in Minneapolis, so I used their existing voter guide that I thought was working really well, and also used the rank 3 optical scan ballot, which is what Minneapolis uses. So once again, trying to simulate real life as much as I could. And then we conducted usability testing, where I walked them through the results display and we talked about it once they had filled out a ballot and read the voter education materials. I do want to mention that when we tested this interactive display, it came out of first testing a paper prototype that we tested in December 2016 of the same display, but again, it was a static interaction. We did that in Oakland and San Francisco and then expanded that into Minneapolis with an actual online version. We had 23 participants in total. Everyone was over 18, and 50% of our participants came to us saying that they had voted in a ranked choice voting election before, so they had experience with this before. We conducted one-on-one interviews with everyone that lasted about an hour after, both during and as part of the process of learning about their experience. So a key discovery was that for many participants, the results display was their first real introduction to how votes are counted under ranked choice voting. And this is a big discovery, because remember I said 50% of our participants said that they had experience in ranked choice voting before. And yet, as we went through the pages, it was as though they were learning something new for the very first time. As we went through the pages, it was also clear that participants wanted explanations while they were looking at the results. They wanted to know why something was happening. They wanted to know why it was this number that was the cutoff. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. And the last point is that the voter guide, the ballot instructions, and the results display reinforced each other. And this is a point that we made yesterday as well, which is you have to be really mindful of the language that you use across these 3 platforms, because people are paying attention to that. And so the moment the language changes a little bit, they get confused. Oh, wait, but you said that my second choice won't be affected, but now this is a different word. Does it still mean it won't be affected? So being consistent in the language is very important to build confidence in this process. So going to the recommendations, things that we learned and things that have helped us refine our interactive display of RCV election results. You want to present information in different formats. Voters of different literacy levels must all be able to understand the information you provide, including when you're trying to explain something as complex as ranked choice voting and the redistribution of votes. So the first guideline here is to use a combination of text and graphics. I've said this for voter ed, I said this for ballot design, and I'm going to reiterate that here. The combination of text and graphics really works well to tell a story. So I want to direct your attention now to the box on the top. It's a text that tells you what's happening in a particular round. A candidate has won, and these are the number of votes that are counted proportionately for the voter's next choice. And then underneath that, so that happened on one page, and then the moment the participant clicked next, it took them to the next page, which was the visual of what they had just read. And so the text and the visual reinforced each other and worked really well. So if someone didn't understand the text clearly, then they could rely on the visuals to get more clarity. On the right side, the image on the right is actually from our results summary page. So it happens at the end of all the results. You can actually see the breakdown round by round of how the winner won. And I just have a quick insight to give here, which is I asked many people liked having majority of our participants liked having both the graph on the top and the table at the bottom. And so I asked people, I said, why do you like the table? Isn't that really text heavy to give you information on what's happening number by number, percent by percent in each round? And actually, majority of the people liked it. And here are a couple of reasons why they said they liked it. They liked having that tabular breakdown of what happens in each round because it gave them a snapshot of the whole process, and then it reinforced the counting logic of ranked choice voting, because now rather than going page by page, they just got the entire picture at the end as a summary. They could see that the actual votes, that a winner got, so this was revealing to them as well. How many votes it took for Betsy Hodges to win, for example. It was useful for them to also see that winners weren't always first choices. And again, this reinforced an underlying principle of ranked choice voting, right? So it was definitely a teaching moment for them. And different people prefer tabular versus graphical data, so it was just good to have both on the same page. Another guideline is to use color and shading and icons to convey information. On the top, we used bubbles, so the dark blue actually showed you how different votes were broken up between the remaining participants. We used gray shading, so in any round when there was a candidate eliminated, that person turned gray, and that was clearly seen in the graph form. And we used orange shading the moment a candidate won. And this was consistent across both the single winner contests as well as the multi-winner contests, where the orange represented the winners, the gray represented eliminated candidates, and the bubbles represented how votes were being redistributed in each round of counting. The second big principle is to explain the logic and reasoning behind the process, and this was a huge learning moment for me, because what this told me as I was testing was that there were times when participants asked me why things were happening, and they just wanted to know that we had thought through the process. So, for example, include details where voters expect them. In this round, this was a single winner contest for Betsy Hodges. That was the race. And up till round 30, remember, there were 35 candidates, so a lot of rounds of eliminations and recalculations. And in round 31, there was a batch elimination. It was the first time a participant was encountering a batch elimination. And almost everybody who reached this round asked me, why are two candidates eliminated at once? Like, why is this round different from the other one? And at that time, we did not have an explanation that you see at the bottom that explained why two candidates, or under what circumstances two candidates can be eliminated at once. And what this told us was people wanted to feel confident that this is a process that has been well thought of. It's a process that has a logic and a rationale behind whatever is happening. We used a smaller font size. You'll see that the explanation is in a smaller font size. And we did that for two reasons. One, we wanted to avoid cluttering the page. The most important information is what is the round, who's eliminated, and how many ballots are going to be counted for the next choice. And so we wanted to reduce the size of the text-heavy part of this. But also we wanted people to know that the information was there. It's kind of like a footnote, that the info is there if you're interested, and if you're not interested, you can skip, but know that there is an explanation for what's happening. And most of our participants, this is exactly what they said to us. When I told them, I said, oh, so if I had information on the breakdown of the numbers or an explanation, would you read everything? And they said, no, we just want to know it's there. I may read it, I may not read it, but I am definitely interested in knowing that that information is there. We also recommend using labels to remind voters of the most important information. So at any point, every point, whenever there's a graphical illustration of what's happening in each round, have your information in bold on what is the cutoff, for example. It's 50% to win here. If you cross that, you win, or 250 votes to win if it's an actual absolute number. You also want to use plain language, especially to explain local laws and terms related to ranked choice voting. So again, here are other footnotes that we included in different pages based on our participants' feedback on them wanting more information. And for each of these, we worked really hard with the RCV Resource Center to make sure that not only did we have the right information in, but on behalf of CCD to make sure that we were championing plain language in this process so that everyone could understand it. So I'm not going to read the explanations here, but in your handouts, you're welcome to read the language that we used. And the last guideline is to be consistent across all RCV materials. I've alluded to this before, and I will say it again. People are using multiple sources of information at the same time. So whether you have information on your website, whether you have information on a voter guide, in your ballot instructions, or in the actual election results display, you want to make sure you're using the same language, you're using it consistently, because people are really relying on that to get the information that they need to vote. You can also include links to online information. So if you have additional resources on your website, you can definitely include that in footnotes and guide people elsewhere to get information on ranked choice voting. You can find our full report on best practices for voter education materials as well as election results on rankedchoicevoting.org. And for general best practices that you can use in a variety of contexts across many documents and interfaces, please do check out our field guides to ensuring voter intent. You can get that on the web link provided here, but you can also just Google Civic Design and field guides and it should pop up for you. I do want to mention at this point that we are actually currently updating our interactive results display. So what I just showed you snapshots of, we actually got an update, I think, up till yesterday, and it's very, very close to being done. If you're interested in learning more about that and perhaps even using that program for your own RCV election results, do contact FairVote. I'm sure they'll be able to guide you through the process and how you can use that for your own election. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Karen and say thank you.
Thank you, Topsy. Today's presentation has been recorded. We wanted to remind folks of that. And we will start our brief question and answer session in just a few moments. Just wanted to remind everyone that we have had several questions throughout the afternoon or morning in some cases for some of our attendees, and we will be providing a supplemental Q&A document once we send the recording out and also post that online. And if you haven't seen how we do those Q&A documents, we try to give very thorough answers while we're live, but the post document does give us an opportunity to try to expand upon the answers and give a little more details. So just stay tuned for that, and we'll be providing those. Also, stay tuned as we have many other webinars planned for the remainder of the year. We've gotten great suggestions when we've surveyed folks from prior webinars. We've listened to you. We're trying to still build out our webinar series. We've got many things that we know need to be covered, and we'll continue to work on that. We will send out alerts about the upcoming webinars via email, so stay tuned. And just want to say thanks to those who have joined us today and throughout the webinar blitz. Perhaps you have been with us for all three, and we greatly appreciate that. We're going to move into the Q&A segment of this webinar. And in addition to Topsy, we'll also have Whitney Quisenberry, who is the co-director of the Center for Civic Design, available to answer questions, and Gary Bartlett, who's the director for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. So with that, I'm going to, I think I've got everyone unmuted. Whitney, I think you'll have to unmute yourself. maybe I do need to. There we go. Okay, I think we've got everyone unmuted. And I want to have just a moment, give Whitney a chance. That she had messaged me with a point about some of the results display and where some of the data, we'll say, came from for those results. And Whitney, if you'll also sort of update folks where we are between phase 1 and phase 2 of the usability study.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So the data that we used to work on the results was, as Topsy said, the mayoral election from 2013. We just pulled that from the website, so we were just taking the publicly available information from Minneapolis. The multi-winner election was actually taken from a demo election that's posted on the FairVote website. So it wasn't actually a Minneapolis election. Just wanted to clarify that. Where we are on the research. So the phase 1 let us get sort of across the board looking at voter education, ballots, and results. In some cases, we found at the end of that we had more questions or wanted to go a little bit more deeply. So the first thing we did was dive into the results. We sort of went forward in one year and backwards the next, looking at first of all, looking at an interactive version of the results, because it's one thing to look at a few pages and it's another thing to actually explore it yourself and be able to go back and forth. The next thing that we're going to be doing is doing a larger scale test on paper ballots at the end of the year. We had some, as Topsy talked about yesterday, we had some very good results learning about what works and what doesn't work. And the question people kept asking us is, isn't there one that's best? We think there may not be one that's best. There may be 2 or 3 that will work well depending on what voting equipment you have and the circumstances and the kind of elections you're running. But we did want to do something we hadn't done, which is compare the best 3 designs that we found head to head. So having voters, a fairly large number of voters, be able to work with each of the ballots and then evaluate them individually and then evaluate them comparatively. So we'll get a little more data to help support decisions that election offices may be making, maybe about how to design their ballots, but also maybe about what capabilities their voting systems need to support a good ballot. And then the last thing that we're going to do is look at digital ballots. Again, there's several different styles of how to do this. There's one that we developed that's kind of a single column on ballot where there's very little drag and drop as the main feature of the ballot. There's a style that lets you drag names from one column to the other, and there's a style that lets you actually just enter the numbers and shuffle the numbers that way to organize your rankings. And we are hoping to be able to get all 3 of them programmed to run the same election so that we can again do a head-to-head study where we really dig into what works and what doesn't work about each of these digital ballots.
Great. Whitney, I'm going to keep you in the hot seat. We've had a participant who has actually been on several of our webinars, as I know it, and they've noticed that the usability study seems to focus on single winner RCV, or as some would know, instant runoff RCV or IRV. And can you talk a little bit about the decision process of the testing being single winner at this point versus looking at multi-winner?
We did start focusing on single winner, to be fair. We have, however, included on our ballots multi-winners, especially on the grid ballots, but also on the optical scan ballots where there's only 3 columns to rank in. So we have included ranking multi-winner elections pretty much from the beginning, and the results display very much focused on being able to display both single winner and multi-winner and trying to understand the differences between how to show those. The voter ed material started with single winner, and we're working on a multi-winner version to go with our next round of testing as well. But because we felt that we had to get through the basics first.
I do want to point out here that in terms of voter education and the results displayed, the multi-winner election results process, so going through that with each participant, was harder for people to understand than the single winner one. Yeah. And A big reason for that is because there are two different types of eliminations that happen in a multi-winner race. And so our participants had a tough time just making sense of one type of elimination, which is where the one with the lowest number of votes gets eliminated and the votes get redistributed, to now two types of elimination where you have a redistribution of excess winner votes as well as an eliminated candidate's redistribution. So it will require extra work in terms of voter ed as well as the language used on a ballot and even in the election results display to clearly explain what happens and why it's different in a multi-winner race.
Yeah, actually, that it's an interesting point that Topsy raises, because some of the words that people working inside the RCV world use didn't work as well. We've been talking about we finally evolved towards active and inactive ballots rather than eliminate or exhausted ballots, trying to sort of avoid words that sound negative, even when we're talking about losers, because there are in fact losers in elections. Redistribution is better than redistribution. So there've been some interesting challenges in finding ways to explain RCV that are both accurate and make sense in normal English.
I think you may have addressed this in just the last responses that you've given, but I will give you an opportunity to go further. One of our attendees noticed on slide 34 that you are presenting a single transferable vote or proportional or multi-winner or whichever way you want to phrase it, results. And just curious as to how do you deal with the question from a voter, but which 20 votes did you transfer?
Yes, indeed. That was the big question, and we've worked hard on some language that we think explains it well enough, because yes, that the slide that they're showing, which is counted proportionally, you have to describe what that means, and we did spend some time trying to sort that out. We do find that it takes a couple of rounds of testing to get to a better solution. What happens is you find the problem in one place, or maybe you know the problem will exist and you come up with a possible solution. But each time you make a change in either the ballot or the results or the voter ed material, you have to kind of readjust everything and retest, and that's one of the reasons we're doing these big tests towards the end of the year.
Great. Okay, let's see, I think we've got two more questions, and I think we've got time for two more questions. Here's for one of our folks, actually in Washington State, when do you start showing the rounds of the results for ranked choice voting? For instance, election night might be 10 days before all the results are in and finalized.
That's certainly a policy decision for the election department to make. We, however, thought about the results as something that could be displayed round by round during election night. The way it works is it reads off a spreadsheet that comes out of the tally system, or the data that comes out of the tally system can be reformatted into a spreadsheet that the program can use. So it could be that we only know step by step at the end, and in that case the first slide that says we know who the winner is would say we're still counting, we're on round 15 or whatever we're on. But we've been told that in most cases the idea is that the rounds, if they're being hand counted, they're very onerous and they take a lot of time, but that some of the new tally systems are going to be able to produce that kind of all at once and quite quickly, in which case then it's simply up to you when to decide to put up the results. I know there's issues about incomplete, what happens in a ranked choice election when the data isn't complete, because then it starts to shift around and your rankings and what happens in each round actually shift around. So I'm going to leave that to the RCV experts to talk about.
Well, I was going to hand it off to Gary and let him talk about, especially with his perspective of being an state elections director for 20 years, of what issues there are in terms of when results are released and how they're funneled out over the certification or canvas period.
Well, first of all, Whitney stated it very succinctly. It's up to each jurisdiction. To give you an example, when we first used it statewide in North Carolina, the State Board of Elections, knowing that it was a first-time process, wanted all eyes and attention to that process. So they waited for the final tally to come directly after our current canvass of non-RCV races. That way, it would be as clear as possible for and open to the public so that they would have confidence in what happened. So it is a policy call, and there is no wrong or right answer. It is exactly what the jurisdiction thinks is best for their results and certification of their election.
And Gary, I'll go to you first, but Whitney, if you need to chime in. What about the initial results? There's
the initial results should be at election night after the polls close. That should be just like any other office that the voter had to participate in. So I would say that would be no different from any other election on election night. It will be it will be unofficial results on election night, and it should be posted as such.
I have nothing to add.
Whitney,
to that.
Do you need to add anything?
No.
Okay. All right, so we're down to our last question that we'll be able to get to today. And Topsy, I'm going to put this one back over to you and once again say thank you for not only a wonderful presentation today, but also yesterday. I think if I could open up the lines and let everybody be unmuted, that I think you'd hear a round of applause. But with that, I'll give you my applause and ask you, this is going into a little bit different area of what we've been discussing in terms of questions. Won't too much information on a voter guide put people off or confuse them further?
First of all, thank you for the applause. In terms of what too much information, it is over-explaining the basics of ranked choice voting and the counting process. So we worked really hard in the section on the voter guide that made the connection between an individual ballot that's been marked and how it fits into the overall counting process, right? This is where the votes get, a candidate who's eliminated, the votes get counted for the remaining candidates. And we worked really hard on minimizing the text for that, because we realized that if you explain it too much using sentences that are too long, using language that is not how people normally talk or understand things, a simple word like provide versus give is just a classic example of words that we might use that throw people off. And remember, in a voter guide, I'm already saying that voters want more information than less, right? They want to know the concept of ranked choice voting. They want to know the benefits of ranked choice voting. And then they want to know how the vote gets counted. So you're already dealing with 3 different pieces of information that you need to provide. So my advice would just be keep the sentences short. Give them the information they need, but keep the sentences short. Use everyday language. And I think and use illustrations along with text to convey your information.
That's really so right on, Topsy. And I just want to add one more thing, that when we say voters want more information than less, that's not a license to write 10 pages of material, right? Sometimes we'll have a sentence and they'll say, I want more, and we'll write 2 or 2.5 sentences and they'll say, that's perfect, right? So it's really about the right information in the fewest words possible, and it's also about using all of our design and layout skills to make sure that it doesn't feel overwhelming as they're trying to make their way through it.
Yeah, and just to go back to the showcase that I showed you, voter ed can take the form of a booklet, which is what we did. It can take the form of a postcard with a front and back. It can take the form of a flyer or a brochure. So there are many different ways in which you can pack the information in, and it's going to come down to how you creatively use your words and your layout to best convey that information.
Great. We have a few other things that have come in along the way that relate back to the questions we've had today, and we'll certainly be adding those additional comments or expansion on questions to the post-webinar question and answer document. That'll be a great way to get that information out and to cover some additional thoughts that we have to these questions. That additional document and the recording of the webinar, as we've said before, will be emailed to attendees and also posted to our website, hopefully in about a week or just a little more than a week. We greatly appreciate your time today and potentially over the last 2 days, and we hope that everyone has a great weekend and will return for our future webinars. Thank you again, Topsy and Whitney, for the work of for Civic Design, and please continue to follow the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center at www.rankedchoicevoting.org. Thank you and goodbye.